Welcome to the Photoshop training channel. I have yet another awesome tutorial for you guys today. As you might already know, I'm a big movie fan, which is why from time to time I will do a movie poster for a tutorial. I think that movie posters are not only good to look at, but we can learn a lot from them. And today's movie poster is no exception. We'll be creating the Man of Steel teaser poster, which you've probably already seen by now. We'll start out by creating the background using images of steel and rust. We'll then add shadows using a layer mask and an adjustment layer. And we'll also create a background highlight. For the Superman logo, we will use a shape layer, which we will apply layer styles to. And we'll bring in more shape layers that will finish off giving form to the logo. Then, we'll add various textures to the Superman logo, such as a grunge texture and old steel textures. After adding highlights, we'll make the logo more three-dimensional by creating an extrusion layer and adding some cool effects to it. And we'll top it all off by adding a shadow that will finalize the logo effect. And of course, we'll create the Man of Steel text. There is a lot to cover in this tutorial, so I'll be going faster than usual. If you get stuck, don't hesitate to pause or rewind the video. And please keep in mind that the original artist probably took a few dozen hours creating this poster, but we'll try to do it all in under 40 minutes. The point of this tutorial is for you to learn the general techniques and for you to then spend some time on your own improving the composition and making it look as good as you can. But anyway, let's get started. The first step is to create a new document. You can create a new document by pressing Ctrl N on your keyboard. That's Command N on the Mac. I'm going to name my document Superman Poster. My width is going to be 1280, height 720, and background contents transparent. Then I'll press OK. First, I'm going to create some guides, splitting my document in half vertically and splitting my document in half horizontally. To do that, you can click on View, New Guide, and in position type 50%. We'll check horizontal, and it'll create a horizontal guide right down the middle. Then we'll do the same thing for the vertical guide. So we'll go to New Guide, click on Vertical, and type 50%. Press OK, and now we have our guides. Next, we're going to bring in our background image. I'm going to click on File, Place, and select my background image. Click on Place, and I'm going to press Enter. Notice that when we brought in the background using the Place command, it automatically converted the image into a smart object. If your image is not a smart object, I would recommend turning it into one. You can convert it into a smart object by right-clicking on your layer and selecting Convert to Smart Object. Then I'm going to click on Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and set my amount to 93%, my radius to 5.2 pixels, threshold to 0, and press OK. And the reason we converted this into a smart object is because if I want to come back and make adjustments later, I can by double clicking on the Unsharp Mask effect name here, and I can make any adjustments I like to this layer. I'm just going to press cancel out of that since I don't want to make any changes, and I'm going to hide the smart filters, that way there's not so much clutter in my layers panel here. Next, I'll bring in my rust layer. I'll click on File, Place, and select the rust.jpg. Click on Place, and I'll add the same sharpen filter. I can just press Ctrl F or Command F, or click on Filter and just click on the first option here, Unsharp Mask, which is the last filter that we use. And it will apply the same filter with the same settings, which is what we want to do. And once we do that, we can come into the channels panel and select the channel that's got the most contrast. In this case, it's going to be the blue channel. We'll click on it and drag it over into the new channel icon to duplicate it. And we'll go into Image, Adjustments, and Levels, and we'll give more contrast. So we want to make the darks darker and the lighters lighter, and we don't want there to be so much gray, so we'll try to get rid of that gray by turning it into white, and the dark grays will turn into black, something like that. Now make sure that your blue copy channels layer is selected, and click Ctrl I on your keyboard, Command I on the Mac to invert. Now if we Control click or Command click on the Mac, you'll select all the white pixels, which is the rust in this layer. And if I click on the layer mask icon here in the layers panel, it'll hide everything else that is not the rust, which is exactly what we want. We'll set the blending mode to overlay and change the opacity to 50%. Next, I'll add a new layer. I'll name it background vignette, and I'll fill it with black by pressing Alt and Backspace or Option Backspace on the Mac. I'll add a new layer mask, and I will also fill it with black. On the layer mask, we're going to add a filter, render, and clouds to get this effect here. Then I'm going to press B on my keyboard for my brush tool. I'm going to set my brush size to about 400 pixels and make sure that it's a soft brush. And I'm just going to click right in the middle twice to get that effect there. And you know what? Maybe I'll make this just a little bit bigger. Maybe I'll just go in a circular motion just to give it a little bit more of a highlight. Then I'll change my foreground color to white, make my brush just a little smaller, and I'll just draw around the edges like so. Just make it dark on the edges. And you don't have to go on a straight line. You can do some wavy, you can draw some wavy lines if you like so. Then set your opacity to 75%, and you get the result you see here. Next, add a brightness and contrast adjustment layer by clicking on the adjustment layer icon here. Click on brightness and contrast, and set your brightness to -90 and your contrast to -4, and add another adjustment layer. This time add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. Click on colorize and set your hue to 220, your saturation to 25, and your lightness to 0, and change the opacity to 30%. Next, create a new layer, and we'll name this layer highlight. Select your brush tool, make sure your foreground's set to white, and with a brush of about 300 pixels, click in the middle twice, and this is going to be the highlight for our background layer. Now the highlight is not blending with my background as well as I would like it to be. I'm just going to double click on the layer to bring in my layer styles and change the blend if options in the underlying layer. If I move this icon here to the right, you'll see how the dark areas of the background start to come out a little bit, and that's what I want. But notice that the edges from the highlight and the background are too dark. If I alt click on the icon here, it splits it in half, and I can create a much smoother transition between the two, and that's what I want to do. So I'll move this icon on the left here to the right just a little bit more, somewhere around 38, and move the icon on the right a little more to the right to about 90 or so. And then I'll press OK. Then I'll click V on my keyboard to select my move tool. I'll hold shift and press the up key on my keyboard to move that up. And I'll duplicate that highlight, and I'll bring that down past the middle of my horizontal guide. And I'll press Ctrl T, and I'll make it smaller since I don't want it to be as big. I'll press enter, and then I'll bring the opacity down of this layer to 60%. And this is my result here. Next, I'll add one more layer. And actually, this layer needs to be at the very top. And I'll call this border vignette. And all I'm going to do here is with my brush tool, and I'm just going to draw once again a border around my image. Set that to 35 opacity. And that's it for our background. What we'll do now is we'll click on the top border vignette layer and click on the background layer while holding shift to select all the layers. Then I'll press Ctrl G, Command G on the Mac to make it into a group, and I'll call this group background. Now the next step is going to be creating our Superman logo. Now the way we're going to do that is we're going to have to trace a Superman logo or whatever logo you're using if you don't want to use the Superman logo. Let me go ahead and open up a file that I created in advance so we can see how that works. This is the Superman logo here, and it's actually created by using many different shapes, not just one shape. So this is how I created the logo here. And what I've done for you is I created this layer here so you can trace the image, and you can use the pen tool and you can go around the image like so using the pen tool to trace that logo. Now you can also add new anchor points if you need to refine the shape that you're drawing, like so. And you can also draw in the gaps, like for example this gap here, the side of the S. And let me show you one trick. If I click and drag, you'll see how that curve is bending perfectly on the S, on the side of the S right here. But if I come to this side here to add the top of the logo, notice how I get this weird bend up here. I don't know how clear this will be in the video, but there's a weird bend going around here, and that's not looking too good, because if I close out my path, and I'll zoom in so you can see that, you see this weird bend going on here, and that's not good. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo those, and I'm going to select my pen tool once again. I'll click on this point, and I'm just going to move around and I'll start drawing that again. So when I get to this point here, if I click and drag to create that bend, what I can do is hold Alt on my keyboard, Option on the Mac, and notice what happens. I can move this handle independently from the other, and I can click on this side here and we don't have that weird bend anymore. So I can come back and close out my shape here, and I can also add another anchor point if I want to match my shape a little bit better. So I'm going to just fit the image on screen, and once you trace this image, make sure that your shapes are selected by clicking the Path Selection tool, and you can click on the adjustment layer icon and click on solid color, and notice how that filled in the shape we were just working on, and you can select whatever color you want, and you can come back into the shape if you need to with the direct selection tool here, and you can move these anchors around if need be. But anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this because I've already done that. Remember that when you trace the image, to create new layer paths for each section. That's going to help you out. And you should have a result similar to what I have here, which is these different shapes. Now, I'm going to be nice for you guys, and I'm going to include this PSD file. So if you're lazy and you don't want to trace this image, you can just use the shapes I have here. But I would highly recommend getting some practice with the pen tool. I think it'll do you some good. So I'll include this file here. You can go to photoshoptrainingchannel.com and look for the Superman movie poster tutorial if you're not there already, and look under the tutorial assets for this PSD file. Anyway, since I have my shapes created already, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the top shape, and at the bottom shape, select all my shapes, and right click on your layers and click on duplicate layers. I know the screen capture software is cutting off that option here, but it reads duplicate layers. You just click on that and you'll get this dialog box here, and you can click on the destination, select the Superman poster, which is the file we're working on, and press OK. If you go back into our Superman poster document, you'll see that the files are brought in. I'm going to press Ctrl G on my keyboard now that all the layers are selected, and rename that group logo. And as you can see, it was brought in and it placed it right down the center, which is exactly where I want it. What I'll do now is I'll open up my logo group, click and drag on the eyes here so all the layers are hidden except for the bottom, except for the last one, except for the main shape layer. And I'll double click on that layer so the layer styles dialog box comes up. And first I'll add some bevel and emboss to this image. I'll set my depth to 100, my size to 5, soften 0, and I'll uncheck use global light. And for angle, I'll type 135. For altitude, I'll put in 37. From my gloss contour, I'll select this one right here, the second one from the bottom, titled Ring. And I'll change the color of my highlight to EFD4D4, which is a pinkish color. Then I'll press OK. And I'll change the color of my shadow to 60%. Then I'll click on Texture to add a texture to my shape. And I'll select the pattern titled Great Granite, which is this one right here. These are the default patterns that Photoshop comes with. If you don't have that on your screen now, just click on the little flyout icon here and click on Reset Patterns and press OK. And then you should get these patterns here, and click on the one on the right titled Great Granite and leave your scale at 100% and change your depth to +4. Then click on Inner Glow. Change your blending mode to normal. Opacity leave at 75%. And we'll change the color to 67001F, which is sort of a dark red color. Press OK. And we'll increase the size of this to about 55 pixels. So I'll just type in 55. And click on Gradient Overlay. We'll select the style Radial. We'll click on Reverse. Make sure your angle is set to 90. And we'll change the blending mode to Overlay. And make sure Align with Layer is selected. And then press OK. And what we're going to do now is turn on the eye for the upper shape, which is this shape here. And I'm going to hide all the layer styles there again to keep things clutter free. And if I hold Alt on my keyboard, which is Option on the Mac, click and drag the little FX icon here, I can add exactly the same layer styles onto that other layer, as you can see there. But the layer styles are not exactly the way we want them. They're almost there. So I'm just going to change those styles just a little bit. So I'm going to double click on that layer. And the first thing I'll do is I'll change my bevel and emboss. And I'll change the size to 3 pixels at an angle of 104 and an altitude of 26. I'll change my gloss contour to linear, which is the first one here. And I'll increase my shadow just a little more. 100% will be fine. Then I'll change my texture depth to +10. Remove my inner glow. Click on Satin. And make sure it's set to black. Multiply. Opacity, we'll bring that down a bit to 40%. Angle is fine at 19 degrees. And we'll set our distance to 11 pixels and 14 pixels. We'll use the S curve you see here and make sure Invert is checked. Then we'll click on Gradient Overlay. Bring our opacity down just a little bit to 80%. And change our blending mode to Multiply. And we'll bring our scale to about 60% or so. And we'll uncheck Align with Layer. And what I can do now is I can come to the left here, and I can click and drag that highlight. I want to place that highlight right in the middle here to match the other highlights. And this looks like a good spot for it, so I'll just leave it there. Next, I'll click on Drop Shadow. Leave the blending mode at Multiply. Click on type 85%. Uncheck Use Global Light. An angle of 90 degrees. A distance of 4. A spread of 70. And a size of 4. And press OK when you're done. And once again, hide the effects. And I can do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to hold Alt, click and drag those effects to the other shapes of my logo. And I'm going to turn the visibility back on by clicking on those eyes there. And this is my result here. I'm going to press Ctrl H on my keyboard to hide my guides. And that's what you get. And you know what? One thing I just noticed is that my main shape, this layer here, it's looking a little bit brighter than the rest of them. And I think I made a mistake earlier with my gradient overlay. And yeah, I set my blending mode to overlay. What I really wanted was my blending mode to be multiply. So that makes it darker, and that's what I originally wanted. So I made a mistake, I apologize. I guess I was going too fast, but as I said earlier, I want to try to do this in a timely manner. Anyway, the next step is to create a layer mask for this group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to control click on the main shape. That's command click on the Mac, by the way. And I'll click on my logo group and click on the layer mask icon, and it creates a layer mask around my shape. Then I'll click on the small lower shape, which is the top layer of this group, and I'll go to File, Place, and I'll bring texture 01.jpg onto this composition, and I'll press enter. I'll set the blending mode to overlay, and if I press V on my keyboard, I can move this texture around, and you can find a spot that you like. I'll just leave that here for now, and I'll do the same thing for layer number 2. So I'll click on File, Place, Texture 02.jpg, and I'll do the same thing. I'll set this to overlay, and again, you can move this around if you want to, or maybe you can resize the layer so you can get a better texture for your logo. I'll do the same thing for texture number 3. File, Place, texture number 3, and click on Place. Once again, I'll set this to overlay, and this time I'll bring the opacity down to 55%, and you can also move this around, and you can resize it if you like. I'll just leave that there for now. Next, I'll add an adjustments layer. It'll be a curves adjustment layer, and I'll just give it a little more contrast. So I'll bring that down and maybe bring this up just a little bit like that to create that highlight there in the middle. And I'll add another adjustment layer, this time a hue saturation layer, and set my hue to 0, my saturation to -38, lightness I'll leave at 0, and what that does is it desaturates the logo just a little bit. It's still as bright but not as saturated, which is what we want. Next, I'll come back and select my main shape, and I'll duplicate that layer, and the main shape copy, I'll just place that right behind the background and move it right above the background so it's outside of the group. I'll go ahead and close that folder, and with my main shape copy selected, I'm going to press Ctrl G on my keyboard to turn it into its own group. I'll rename this group Extrusion, and the main shape copy I'll rename to Extrusion Shape. Then I can press Ctrl T on my keyboard to select the extrusion shape. If I hold Alt and Shift, I can make that extrusion smaller, and let me remove the layer styles by right clicking on it and clicking on clear layer styles, and you'll see the extrusion here. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, and if I select the white arrow tool, which is the direct selection tool, I can select the points from this extrusion, and I can move those around so there's no weird gaps like here and up here. So I'm just going to move those around a little bit, and actually maybe I'll move this one up. I'll move this one up as well. And I would like for the bottom here to have a little more of an extrusion effect, so I'm going to click on that one, hold Shift, click on this point here, and I'm just going to move those up just a few pixels. I'll do the same thing for these here, like so. And maybe I can move this to the left a little bit and move these to the right a little bit. And I'll actually move these down too to give a little more extrusion here at the top. So I'll just move them down just a little bit, something like that. And maybe this one, and this one here I can move to the left to give it more extrusion there, and I'll do the same thing for this one here. Something like that. Next, I'm going to double click on my extrusion shape. I'm going to click on gradient overlay, and I'll double click on this icon here to edit my gradient. I'm going to double click on this black square here to change its color. and we're gonna make it into an orange color. I'll type in E55B17. I'll press OK, and I'll click again so it creates a second color swatch of the same color, and I'll drag that to the right just a little bit. Then I'll click here, and it creates a third orange swatch, but that's not the color I want, so I'll double click on it. And the color that I want there is a brown color, so I'll type in 29180E, press OK, and click to the right of that about here to create a second brown color swatch for my gradient. Then I'll double click on the white one here, and this time I want to make it yellow, so I'll type EFBB3E, press OK, and click a little bit to the left of that to create a second one. And if you notice, the yellow ones are the highlights right up top here, the brown colors, the shadows here and here, and the orange are the neutral colors at the bottom. And if I drag these to the left, you can see the shadow gets a little bit darker here. If I drag these to the right, you'll see the same effect up here. I don't want the shadow to be that high up, so I'll move it back to the left. And when you're done, just press OK, and then click OK on your layer style dialog box to accept those changes. What I'll do now is add a new adjustment layer. This time I'll add a pattern adjustment layer, and I'll click on the fine grain pattern here, press OK, set my blending mode to multiply, and set the opacity to 40%. And actually, you know what, my pattern's just a little too big, so I'm going to double click on the pattern here and just scale it down to about 50% or so, and then press OK. Now, if you notice, our pattern is affecting the entire layer. We only want it to affect the extrusion shape. So if we hold Alt on our keyboard, you can see that down pointing arrow with a square next to it, and that'll turn it into a clipping mask. Now, what this usually does is it makes it so that the only pixels that show on this top layer are the pixels that are visible in the bottom layer. But since we have layer effects applied to this layer, it's completely hiding that pattern effect. So watch what happens if I disable my effects. You'll see the pattern on my extrusion layer. If I enable those effects, the pattern goes away. So how can we keep that gradient but also add that pattern overlay? Well, one of the things we can do is just click on the layer, and then click on layer, layer style, and click on create layer. Then press OK. What that does is it takes the layer style, adds it into its own layer, and creates a clipping mask out of it. So now we can have the pattern, the gradient, and the layer, and everything works beautifully. What we can do now is keep adding layers and apply clipping masks to them so that they only show with the visible pixels of the extrusion layer. So what I'll do now is I'll click on the pattern adjustment layer, I'll add a new layer, I'll fill it with black, then Alt on my keyboard, Command on the Mac, put my cursor in between those two layers until I get the down pointing arrow with the square next to it, and click to create my clipping mask. Then I'll go into Filter, Render, Fibers. My variance I'll set to 6, and my strength to 45. I'll press OK. Then I'll change the blending mode to Color Burn, and bring my opacity down to about 20%. I'll add one more layer. I'll fill it with black. I will also make a clipping mask. Then I'll set it to 30%. Add a layer mask and fill it with black. And that hides it completely. What I'll do now is I'll grab my polygonal lasso tool, and I'm gonna give this extrusion layer some dimension. And what I'll do is I'll click in the edges here, like so, and make sure that my layer mask is selected. I'll change my foreground color to white, and I'll fill it with white. And I'll zoom in so you can see it created that edge there, which is going to give our extrusion layer some dimension. I'll set this to fit to screen, and you know what, actually I'm a little too far away. I'll zoom in just a little bit more. And what I'll do is, once again, I'll select my polygonal lasso tool, and I have to figure out where I think the shadows would be, or where the darkest side would be of each of the sides of this extrusion layer, so I can fill it with white, which in turn will make it black. And I can click on these here, fill that, and again, you'll see the results here. And you know what, I think I need to make this dark here as well. And this is the last one I need to fill with white to make it dark. And that's a result there, as you can see, and I'll zoom in. It created this, it creates these edges, and it makes it look a little more 3D, as you can see there, here and here. Then I'll click on fit to screen so we can see the entire image. I'll add one more layer, and this layer I'll name highlights. I'll make it into a layer into a clipping mask. I'll press B on my keyboard to select my brush tool, and I'll press X on my keyboard to make my foreground white. And now I'm going to paint wherever I think there would be highlights on this extrusion layer. So I already know there's going to be a light behind this text. So the light's probably coming from the top somewhere. It's reflecting off the steel in the background and coming and hitting my logo. So there'll probably be some light here, maybe some here, maybe some here as well. Something like that. Then I'll set my layer to overlay and bring the opacity down to about 50%. And what that does is it gives the background layer just a little more shape. So that's before and that's after. So you can see it looks just a little bit better. I'll add another layer, of course, make it into a clipping mask, and I'll title this layer Shadow. And we'll do the same thing, but this time with black. And we'll also have to think more or less where we think the shadows would be. So maybe here, maybe coming off here. Something like that. And again, I'll set this to overlay, and I'll bring my opacity down to 50%. That's after, and that's before, and that's after. Again, adding these shadows and highlights gives it a little more shape, a little more dimension. What I'll do now is I'll close this folder here, go back into my logo folder, click and drag texture number 2 to create a new layer, and then click and drag it down to our extrusion folder and drop it in there. I'll go ahead and close this logo folder since we don't need it at this point. And I have to find the texture number 2, which came here to the bottom. So I'm just going to drag that up to the very top. And of course, I'll make it into a clipping mask. But this time I'll change this blending mode from overlay to soft light and change the opacity to 65%. I'll add one more group on top of all these groups, and I'll name this group Highlight. Then I'll click on my logo layer mask here, and I'll shift control click on the extrusion shape so it selects the entire logo shape, including the extrusion. Then I can create a layer mask with that shape for my highlight layer. I'll add a new layer to that group, and with my brush tool selected, I'll set my foreground color to white, create a highlight for this text, something like that. Then I'll set my blending mode to overlay, and maybe bring the opacity to about 80%. We'll add a new layer, and we'll name this layer Top Highlight. And the bottom one, might as well name it now. I'll call it General Highlight. And on the top highlight layer, I'm just going to paint on top here. And this is where the light is actually hitting the logo here. And we'll do what we did with the background layer before. We'll have some of the blacks come out just a little bit. So we'll double click on that and we'll change our blend if options, and we'll move this to the left and click on Alt as well to split these. And this time I actually want it just a little bit brighter, so somewhere around here at 4, and the other side I don't know, somewhere around 26. That'll work okay. And press OK. And I can actually create a layer mask, and with a black brush I can hide the areas where I don't want the highlight to appear. I can click and drag that layer to create a new layer, and I can bring the opacity down on that layer to create a stronger highlight, like so. And I can actually press Ctrl T and maybe decrease the size of that layer so it only applies to a certain spot here, and there's a stronger highlight here in the middle, and the highlight is not as strong on the sides. I'll go ahead and close that folder. What I'll do now is I'll click on my background group and click on the create new group icon, and I'll call this group shadow, which will be the shadow for the entire logo. I'll click on the highlight layer mask to select the entire group, including the extrusion. I'll create a new layer within my shadow group, and I'll fill it with black. And I'm going to select my move tool and hold shift and press down once. Then I'll click and drag my shadow layer, and I'll hit shift and down once again. And I'll bring the opacity to about 75%. And I'll bring this group to the bottom. So the group on the top is the one that's set to 100%. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see what's going to happen. There's a hard edge here. I don't want that. So what I'll do is I'll go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and somewhere around 3.2 the hard edge disappears, and that's what we want. So I'll leave that at 3.2, then I'll press OK, and I'll click on Fit to Screen, and everything's looking pretty good except for two areas. Here on the left, it's a little bit jaggy, so what I'll do is I'll just grab the marquee tool and then just fill with black. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. Something like that. And yeah, that looks pretty good. And then I'll click on Fit to Screen, and now we have the shadow for our logo. And if you want to, you can move it down maybe just a few pixels. I think the shadow needs to come down just a little bit more, but I'll leave it there for now. But within your composition, feel free to move as many things as you want to try to get them to look just a little bit better. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the highlight group and shift click on the shadow group, select all of those groups, press Ctrl G on my keyboard to make it into one group, and I'll just call this group S logo, S for Superman of course. And now it's all in one single group, and I can move it around if I want to. I'm going to add one group on top of all these groups, and I'll title this group Text. Then I'll grab my text tool, and I'll type the words in Ibrima, bold, at 43 points, centered with the color white, and I'll type Man of Steel in capital letters. Now I got the spacing by clicking on the character and paragraph panels and changing the tracking to 1070, so you can do that as well. I'm going to click on my move tool, and then I'll press Ctrl H to bring my guides back. And you know what? I'll add a guide here at the edge, and I'll add another guide here at the edge so I can center my text just a little bit better, something like that. I'm going to press Ctrl H again. It's probably not centered 100%, but again, we're a little short of time here. This tutorial is already going a little long, and a few pixels off won't make too much of a difference, so we'll just stick with this. What I'll do now is I'll duplicate my background layer, I'll bring that into the text layer, and put it above the text we just created, create a clipping mask out of it, and set the opacity to 75%. Next, we'll add a new layer I'll make a clipping mask out of it, and with my brush tool selected, I'll set my foreground color to white, and I'll paint right on top of that so the top half of my letters are white, and you can see the texture in the bottom half of the letters. Then I'll add an adjustment layer, a curves adjustment layer, and I'll create an S curve to give it just a little more contrast. And of course, I'll make that into a clipping mask. And I'll double click on my Man of Steel text, and I'll add some bevel and emboss. And just bring the size down to 0. I barely want to see that bevel, something like that, and maybe add a draw up shadow, but again, I don't want it to be too prominent, so I'll bring that just so you can barely see it, and maybe increase the size 1 or 2 pixels to feather it a little bit. And I'll bring the opacity down all the way to 0, but then I'll bring it up maybe to 16 or 15 so you could barely see it. Then I'll press OK. I'll click on fit to screen. What I'll do now is I'll click on my curves layer and then click on the new layer icon. I'll fill this layer with black. Go to filter, render, lens flare, and click right in the middle of this preview box here and set your lens type to movie prime. Press OK. Then go to image, adjustment, hue saturation, desaturate, and curves, and do this S curve here so it's a little brighter. Then press OK. Change the blending mode to screen. Press Ctrl T on your keyboard, hold Alt Shift and make that smaller, and place it right on top of the S, like so. And I'll zoom in so you can see that better. And I'll place that maybe there. And I will also add the same layer to, and actually I'll just name it S highlight so we know what this layer is. I'll duplicate this layer and I'll add this to the letter M. So I'll go ahead and move that to the M, and I'll rotate that just a little bit just to give it a different shape than the S here. I'll duplicate the S layer once again, and this one is going to be for the letter N, and I'll press the V key to move that to the letter N, and I'll place it there. I'll press Ctrl T again on this one, and I'll make this one even smaller. You can barely see the highlight on that N. I'll duplicate the S highlight once again, and this time I'll place it in the letter L, and I'll move that here, and I'll make it smaller, but not as small as the other two, just a little bit smaller, and then I'll rotate it, just to give it a different look than the S there. Then I'll click on my zoom tool, right click on the screen, and click on fit to screen, and that is our Superman Man of Steel movie poster. My apologies if I went a little long, but I really wanted to complete this project in one video. Remember, go to my website, photoshoptrainingchannel.com, if you're not already there, to download the images that I used in this tutorial. Also, while you're there, take the time to subscribe to my free newsletter by entering your email on the top right of the page or under each tutorial. Once you subscribe to my newsletter, you will not only receive email notifications every time I put up a new tutorial, but I will send you subscriber-only tutorials and other goodies every so often. Also, check out my Facebook page, and don't forget to click the like button if you enjoy this tutorial. If you have a YouTube account, click here to subscribe to my channel, or go to youtube.com/user/PhotoshopTrainingCH to subscribe. As always, I hope that you learned a lot from watching this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys soon.